You are listening to Down Home. The North End of Halifax was traditionally home to one of the largest black populations in Nova Scotia. Back in the 1800s, African Americans who had escaped slavery settled in areas like Africville and Creighton Street. As time passed, the North End became an epicenter of black-owned businesses and important black Nova Scotian institutions like the Black United Front and the African United Baptist Association. My cousin Corey Chandler joins us this week to discuss the cultural impact the North End had on his life growing up in the 1980s and what went into his decision to leave Halifax. Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground. Welcome to Down Home, the Nova Scotian experience from two black men. I am Derek Wise, and as always, we have Jay Jones.
What's happening, y'all?
And in this episode, we have my cousin Corey Chandler. What's up, Corey?
What's up?
What's up,
here.
Corey?
Yeah, so
What's good?
Me and Corey grew up in the same house, in our grandparents' house in the North End of Halifax, Creighton Street. Our family actually has a very long history on Creighton Street. I actually traced it back to the 1890s, so that our grandfather's father lived on that street. So we have a deep history in the North End of Halifax, and particularly on Creighton Street. Your particular time in your life was the 80s. You know, you're a young black man. You were going to high school in the 80s. You know, the 80s, you had the beginnings of hip hop. You had the convergence of technology. The VHS was coming out, got Commodore 64 and stuff like that. So when we talk about Creighton Street in the 80s, what sort of impact did that have on your life? What runs through your mind?
And did you have a fanny pack?
I had a fanny. Yeah, well, I had a plastic bag back then. Was no fanny packs for me. But yeah, so growing up in the 80s, let's say the mid 80s, I was in high school. I'm not that old, but in the 80s I was 12. I can think of, first of all, junior high at Bloomfield, and Creighton Street was actually an awesome street. It was a street filled with love, filled with lots of things happening. The families knew each other. It was a great time in my life. Now there are layers to that, though.
So layers,
and layers of happiness.
What do you mean by layers?
Layers, because when you look back now, as we're adults, and you look back, you get a different perspective, because everyone's perspective is different, of course. When we look back, the different influences that built our life, it depending on what year it was, of course, but the different aspects of how we grew up, it was sort of felt differently as an adult.
Yeah.
And as you gain new experiences as you get older. For example, we had families that owned their homes, like black families that owned their homes on Creighton Street. Yeah. And of course, our grandparents owned their home, the red house at 2360 Creighton Street. You had the Adamses, you had the Drummonds, you had the Downeys that owned their property on that street. The Days, the Days were there, the Idaroos, so they were homeowners. I could always hear our grandmother calling us in, Corey, Eric, out the window. It doesn't matter, at sundown, right?
Yeah.
Those are the memories that I remember.
Yeah.
When I got to high school, sneaking in because Granny wasn't no joke. She used to lock that screen door. You couldn't get in the screen door even though I had a key. Right? She used to lock that screen door to get you caught. But what I did was one day I went down to the alleyway and I jumped over the fence in the back, and I'm glad she didn't. She forgot to lock the back screen door. She must have been doing guardian that day. Forgot to lock the back screen door, and I had the key to that, and I was up. But
So you
a lot of
mentioned
memories.
high school and hanging out. So back then, mid '80s, what type of events and things come to mind? The one big one that kind of permeated through all of Halifax and most of the province was the Black Tournament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Talk about your memories about the Black Tournament and other events like dances and stuff like that.
Black Tournament. Yeah, that was one of the pinnacle events that everyone looked for. I think it was would have been the beginning of the summer, if I'm not mistaken. So what that was a tournament of all the community teams, and we had some great community teams. We had some great players. They also invited teams from New York. I believe it was a team came over from Boston, and Halifax could ball.
Just to clarify, when we talk about the Black Tournament, we're referring to the annual Black Invitational Basketball Tournament. The tournament's website states that it draws participants, both players and spectators, from around the world, and over its 40-plus years has become a major Nova Scotian sporting event. But the website that I found hadn't been updated in 4 years, so we are not sure what is going on with the tournament these days.
There were some great athletes, great community camaraderie. It was fun all the way around for that whole weekend. So the Black Tournament was one of the pinnacle landmark tournaments or landmark events that I remember. There was also something that I don't know if anyone, many people remember, is Got to Get to Gaudigan Street. So
what? The Got to Get to Gaudigan Street?
Got to Get to Gaudigan. They even had T-shirts. I had a T-shirt.
What's
and
that?
Gaudigan Street. Well, Gaudigan Street, I don't know if you remember, it was just down from Creighton Street, the one street south. Gaudigan was our main street. And actually, Gaudigan was historically a main street for the port cities, the sailors and whatnot. They had the Derby there. It had the Tap, which were the local lounges. It had some other things. It had the Metropolitan store that was on Gaudigan Street. So that was a festival that used to go on as well. Got to Get to Gaudigan Street.
So what type of festival was it though? I don't remember that.
It was a street festival. So they would rope off. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was they would rope off Gaudigan Street and they would have various things, clowns, and they would have representation of the stores that were on the street. They had barbecues and whatnot. Music, bands. It was like a jazz festival at Gaudigan Street.
Really?
Wow.
I don't remember that, man.
Me either.
Jeez.
Well, you got to get to Gaudigan Street, man. Well, you guys, yeah. But
what about the one thing that when I was in Australia, like I remember hanging out with one of my coworkers, and he would say, all those dances that you see in the movies from North America, is that real? Is that real? I remember the dances at QE and St. Pat's and other community centers. Talk about that, because that was like I don't even think they have dances like that up here in Ontario. Like the level of them and they were quite
the video
intricate.
dances and stuff. Yeah, well, Queen Elizabeth was, I believe, before St. Patrick's had the video dance. If I'm not mistaken, someone may have to correct me on that, but we had video dances from the local radio station C100. One of the biggest songs was "Push It" from Salt and Pepper. That was played about 7 times throughout the night, because and Life is a Highway was a big one. But anyway, so you had Push It. But the dances were something that there was a styling and profiling and a posturing aspect, and it was also good fun. So QE would compete with St. Pat's usually, who had the best dances, and sometimes QE people would go to St. Pat's to go to the dances, and then they started limiting how many people could go. You know how that goes, limiting dress codes and whatnot. So, um, yeah. So, in regards to the dances, um, they were a big part of high school for sure. I played football in high school, so um, the last 2 years, for the last 3 years in high school, I should say, um, and so we were part of the, how could you say, the administrative coat check and bouncing. We did that for fundraising and stuff. So I didn't have much time to dilly dally or whatever, but yeah, I remember the dances were a big part. There was lots happening there.
What what was it like for you in high school as far as, like you say, Creighton Street, a long history, the North End, the Black community, and then going to QEH and sort of mixing outside of that, because you had people coming from all different sort of districts, like from Spryfield to the South End to the North End. How was that for you on a cultural standpoint?
Well, what we were just talking about in regards to high school, going to high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people ask me here in Ontario, in general, in Toronto, what was Halifax like? And well, I say to them, well, Halifax, I grew up with Greek, I grew up with Lebanese, we had Korean, we had Indian, we had a lot of multicultural. So in retrospect, Halifax was a microcosm of Toronto. It was
And
very
you found that
multicultural.
in the North End?
Found that in the North End.
Yeah,
There
it's
was
true.
North End.
A lot of
I have
family-owned businesses.
exactly family-owned businesses, people that we know today, as you guys know, that are various ethnic backgrounds. So it when I moved here, it wasn't so much of a culture shock to see is this on a larger scale. Um, those things. So in I can always say in growing up in high school in Halifax, growing up in general, it was a multicultural base, and uh, it's no different from the representative of what's going on in Canada in general.
Mhm.
Although there's a different feel, um, it's a different place. There's no subtle ethnic. How should I say? Well, I'm not going to cut the ethnic discrimination. Is not subtle in Nova Scotia. Whereas if you go most places in Canada, it's subtle.
Yeah.
Okay. So we grew up with a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, different ethnic people that we know today. And,
So that didn't affect you as much. You were kind of prepared for it, I guess. Yeah.
prepared for it. Definitely.
Yeah. And what role did the church play in your life? Obviously, your grandmother, Edith Chandler, head deaconess of
Yes.
Cornwallis Street Baptist Church, which was the church as far as the North End community goes. I lived in Spryfield, Klein Heights, I should say, and we'd come every Sunday. So there was always a sense of Black community, and our grandparents and different family members that actually grew up on Creighton Street were heavily involved in the culture of and leaders of the church. What impact did that have on your life?
Well, huge. And I think Derek can attest to that. As far as long as I could remember uh, understanding the English language, so to speak. So that would be 3, 4, as I can remember, zoning in. It's almost like when you're a child, this is my perception of things. You're waking up and it slowly comes in and you hear voices, you understand English. So what the interpretation was, our grandmother used to read the Bible to us every single Sunday. And so honestly, we probably heard the Bible from cover to cover. I would say in our lifetime with our grandmother, myself, probably 3 times.
Well, at least,
in general.
At least.
Yeah. Like through, she would read it and she would save the place and come back and we read again. Sometimes it would be throughout the week as well. And as you mentioned, she was a deaconess of the church, but deaconess, and she was high standing in the church. So we would sometimes go to church maybe 3 times a Sunday,
Yeah.
2 times minimum. And you know
Yeah.
that, Jay. So
Yeah.
now what that did, I watched my grandmother, and my perception of my grandmother of our grandmother there was she was more spiritual than religious.
Yeah, I agree.
So that built the spiritual base for me going forward, and still does. So it was huge. Kewala Street Baptist Church, Reverend Mack was huge, and he was an excellent preacher.
Yeah, he was good at his sermons.
He was good at his sermons. He could bring it. He could convince you.
Yeah. What about the upper room?
The upper room was a secret. Derek, I don't know if Derek can go back to the annals of his mind, and we'd have to hypnotize him. Maybe he was young because he didn't go to daycare sometimes, and Nanny would take him to the upper room with him. I would come there to bring her lunch, or if she had an errand for me to run, I would come up there briefly, and I knew it was a secret place. It would hush when.
So what were they? What were they doing in the upper room?
Well, the upper room was. It was a collection of deacons and deaconesses that went a little bit deeper into their Bible study than your average parishioner. So, and they would pick out the texts of the Bible and interpret certain things, like the Book of Revelations.
Deeply interpret. Yeah, but they had special books. They had different books. They just didn't have the Bible. So there was something that was upper going on up in an upper room. Something,
Yeah. Well, I was there while it was happening a couple times, but I was too young to sort of understand, right?
Yeah.
But because they had it in the center that Sid, my grandfather, ran.
Yep. Yeah. Deacon Jones. Jones.
After all that, strong sense of community, a good family upbringing, good high school. What made you leap to move to Toronto?
Yeah, that's a good question, although it's also a layered question. Well, for me, Halifax had a ceiling. Growing up, as deep and rich as the history was of our forefathers and foremothers, and Halifax does have a deep history, it was a ceiling for me. So I felt stagnant. That was the first thing. Because sure enough, after getting from school, I could have stayed there and probably gotten a job. But I needed to move, to stretch my legs, so to speak. And I felt that leaving Halifax was the best thing for me, and to avoid frustration and to avoid depression. And you're right, Jay, it was a great high school, great university. I went to Dalhousie University. I also had close friends, a few close friends that felt the same way. And so we all moved up to Ontario at the same time. So we had a great support system. But getting back to Halifax, there were few opportunities at the time,
right,
in order to earn a living for various reasons. And again, that's a discussion for another show. But to put it plainly, there wasn't much opportunities for young Black men in Halifax at that time.
Yeah. Well, we can get into that, man. It's not
it's not taboo.
It's not any secret. Like I sent a link to Jay, and it was a National Film Board mini doc on Rocky Jones, and he was speaking at Kawacha House.
Yeah.
And he was talking about an instance, and this was like 1969, 1970.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how a friend of his went down to Goddican Street, and he was looking for a job. So he went to the Cove Theater. The Cove Theater. Remember the Cove?
Right.
Yes, the Cove and the
And
casino. Yeah.
yeah, the Cove and the casino. So he went to the Cove Theater, and he was like, had his resume in hand. He was, dressed well. He went to the theater and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a job. Do you have any jobs? I got my resume here." And the theater manager said, "Nope, no jobs here." The guy's friend went back the next day, and the guy's friend was white. Went
Yeah.
back the next day, same thing, same
Got a
job.
procedure, and got a job.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Halifax is not immune to systemic racism. And
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. And the thing about it is this: because of the size, and this is no excuse, because of the size of the area, or the metropolitan area of Halifax and Nova Scotia, you're going to get a more of a systemic situation. But I'm going to tell you, the opportunities were more for me in Ontario, Toronto here, but the same systemic situation prevails here as well, but it's more subtle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you may get the job, but you're ostracized. You're given assignments that are set up to fail. It still does prevail and persist here, although it's not in every situation, because of the large size of the city and the large population base, the large ethnic base. It's kind of not really economically viable for them to keep it going. But in Halifax, yes, it persists more constantly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's more than fair. There is more opportunity up here in Toronto as a whole, and that's why a lot of us have moved away.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, just because we're not there now doesn't mean that we don't support, and we may not even return one day to support our province, our place of our home, right? So
well, either way, it's still home, though, I guess.
It is still
Yeah.
home.
Yeah. I mean, systemic racism is just, rampant everywhere in the world.
Yeah. Well, growing up in Halifax, another thing is that I wanted to convey is that when you grow up in Halifax, you can basically live anywhere in the world, and that's my take on things. Here in Ontario, as I said, it's subtle, it's softer, but subtle racism is not is actually worse than direct. But around the world, it's sort of the same thing. But you have to persist. You educate yourself. You have to play the right situation and have the right attitude, and that's what it's all about. You have to persist, and we are good at persisting.
So you're saying that growing up in Halifax gave you those skills.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they gave us the skills to, and a lot of people they don't realize, I guess, until they may travel. They gave you the skills not only to move within various crowds, but to also recognize what you need to do to react in certain situations, because it's not always fight the power. It's to observe the power and to know how to defeat it diplomatically, because it's a mind game, it's a conscious game, and we have to learn how to um, beat them at that game at their own means, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Well,
for sure.
It's been cool reminiscing about Creighton Street. That's for sure, man. Did you get any other thoughts about Creighton Street before we wrap up?
Red House on Creighton Street. Well, we have a lot of friends that may come up to you in years to come. I don't want to say any names, but we have a lot of prominent and memorable names on Creighton Street. I remember there's so many good memories. As I said, it's layered. When you look back as an adult, when I look back as an adult, it was a good run. It was a good time. It was a great time. It was, I'd have it no other way. I always say I have it no other way but to grow up where I did in Nova Scotia, and I would have it no other way and any other day. Sorry to rhyme, Jay. That's your job.
You're getting better.
Yeah.
You said 3 rhyme words in a row.
Yeah.
Jay Jones, take us over, man.
Yeah, well, Corey, I mean, you're our brother. We've been friends for a long time, and it's good for you to share your story, but a little bit about where you came from, a little bit of what you saw with Derek, and talking about that strong Black community in Halifax. And of course, shout out to, Edith Chandler.
Yes.
And, a very strong woman. And yeah, man, thanks for coming on and sharing a little bit about it yourself,
Awesome.
Appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. And as I said, there's a layered situation. So, we hope to talk about that in another time, another place.
So we have to really watch what's going on with the onions, I guess, huh?
Exactly.
Many layers.
Many layers, guys.
The layers of the onion.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new.
The song Breaking New Ground from The Breakdown.
On a high plateau, from the one down below to the future of the funk, getting lost in the flow, contact with